Hello everyone and welcome. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is one of the most controversial Zelda games. Nintendo has made so many huge and small improvements and changes, and actually shows Nintendo does listen to their fans. Almost everything fans asked to be changed or added has been, plus things no one even thought of. Skyward Sword HD actually feels like a new and different game than the original. Many people loved everything it offered. Motion controls, claiming it has the best story of any Zelda games, recommended it to everyone, and hoped it would re-release on the Wii U or Switch in HD. However, just as many people hated it. While some complaints are legitimate, others I've seen just make me cringe, saying the motion controls were horrible and didn't work. It should have offered a left-handed option for players who weren't right-handed, or at least a way to play without motion controls. They think the graphics are a huge downgrade from the realistic Twilight Princess. And one review I remember, here comes the cringe part, one of the most popular gaming publications gave the game a bad score, and their big complaint was that it wasn't in HD. And moving from a PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 game, like Skyrim, and going to Skyward Sword made them not want to even try it. Maybe it's just me, but giving a game a low score just because it isn't in HD, while knowing the game was literally designed for a console we know isn't HD, that's like giving Ocarina of Time a low score because it's lacking multiplayer. As with Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD, as well as other Zelda remakes and remasters, Nintendo has done an amazing job and fixed almost every complaint people had, as well as improving and changing things that we didn't even think about. Better details and lighting. It's almost like going to the details setting on a PC game and switching everything from low to medium or high. Instead of the low resolution textures and details, we actually get full HD textures, giving literally everything a more detailed and better overall look. Not just raising the resolution like when using an emulator such as Dolphin. Link's character model is even improved, with sharp edges now rounded off and overall having a lot more polygons. We also have lighting that, to me, seems to be improved. I've only seen it in a few areas and trailers, but it is noticeable, at least to me. You'll also find other visual improvements, and this all adds up to make the game truly look amazing, even compared to being emulated on the Dolphin emulator, which I have a video doing a 4K comparison, and despite being 4 times the resolution of the official Skyward Sword HD, the Nintendo Switch version looks a lot better than even the 4K version. Full HD and 60 frames. This is an incredible improvement. Some people will say resolution and frame rate doesn't matter at all, but having over 4 times the normal resolution lets you easily see everything clearly, even things far off in the distance. Then adding in the much smoother frame rate, it actually does matter and improve gameplay a lot, allowing you to be a lot more accurate when aiming arrows or the claw shot. So yes, in this case, better graphics does actually heavily affect and improve the gameplay. As mentioned earlier, a lot of people completely ignored the game and didn't even give it a chance because it wasn't 1080p. The crazy part is most PS3 and Xbox 360 games that Skyward Sword was being compared to were barely HD. Yes, some ran at 720p and a few did run at 1080p, but most ran somewhere between 480p and 720p. Even the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One have trouble playing certain games at 1080p and 720p, and had to have dynamic resolution that would adapt to how intense the scene was. So some of these incredible HD games it was being compared to at the time weren't even technically HD, and just barely more than Skyward Sword's 480p. So the reason some people dismissed Skyward Sword wasn't even valid, and now, not only is it full 1080p, but the first Zelda game that is 1080p and 60 frames per second. Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD were only 1080p and 30 frames per second, but even at that, they still had major slowdowns in certain areas, twice as bad as Korok Forest in Breath of the Wild, where the frame rate starts chugging along at what seems like 5 frames or less. Even with as powerful as the Wii U was, it still had trouble handling these GameCube remasters or remakes. Specifically, if you're standing behind the waterfall close to Zora's domain, now the Nintendo Switch seems to run the newest Zelda remaster or remake at its absolute max, and still has power left over. Free camera. The game makes use of the right stick and allows us to have free control of the camera. This seems like it isn't a big deal, but all you need to do is play Twilight Princess on Wii, and then play the GameCube or HD version, which has free camera control. Another great example is Majora's Mask 3D, when played on the normal 3DS and on the new 3DS, as the new 3DS allows you to use the C-Stick to control the camera. It makes a world of difference. You wouldn't think something like this would change much, but it gives you so much more control and accuracy. It also gives you a better chance to pan the camera around to take a look at all of the amazing art and scenery in this game. The cursed bug is gone. What is the most annoying thing people complained about? Every time you pick up an item, you are prompted with the same on-screen text, as if it was your first time collecting it. This made a lot of players go out of their way to avoid them, just so it wouldn't slow down the gameplay and pull them out of the game. I've actually heard people say they did just this, and never really tried doing side quests, which required many of these items. Nintendo has now perfectly fixed this bug, and those who avoided these side quests can now have a completely new experience with the game, and not worry about the constant slowdowns or pop-up text. Fixing the intro. Nintendo has completely revamped the beginning of the game. The intro for Skyward Sword took a long time to get through before you make it. Before you make it to where many say the game actually starts, when you are finally on the ground below, making your way to the first dungeon. The original had a lot of text and dialogue you had to sit through as it explains everything in detail to you. Now, we can just skip past all of this and get through the intro in probably half or 3/4 of the time, which means more time playing and less time waiting on text or instructions of what we already know. Fi is now fixed. Another huge complaint fans had, even those who loved the game still had issues with her always popping up. Now you can just choose to ignore her, allowing the game to progress faster without interruptions every 10 minutes. Battery life. Probably the best thing about using the Joy-Cons instead of a Wiimote with Wii Motion Plus, the Joy-Cons can fully charge quickly and last what seems like several times longer than a Wiimote with new batteries. When the batteries do get low, it takes 2 seconds to slide the Joy-Cons back onto the Switch and play in handheld while they charge, or switch them out with 2 more Joy-Cons with a full battery. Where it took a long time to take off the Wiimote grip, replace the batteries, put the grip back on, recalibrate the Wiimote, and then finally continue the game. Not to mention how often you may actually be changing out 4 fresh batteries, or grabbing and pairing a second Wiimote. Even if Fi still popped up like she normally did, this would still make her a lot less annoying, as she wouldn't be interrupting the game, telling us that our batteries are low. Motion and traditional controls. This completely changes the entire feel of the game. Another huge complaint people had was the motion controls. We actually have a video, and I even did several live streams of Skyward Sword HD where I mapped the motion controls to the right analog stick and played with an Xbox 360 controller, and it worked perfectly, which Daniel and I have been saying for years for Nintendo to do. For those who may not be accurate with motion controls, or just wanting to play it on the go, or while laying down too tired to do the crazy exercise that is destroying hundreds of bokoblins like we're in Hyrule Warriors, or the workout you'll have facing Demise for the first time. Better motion controls. For those who do love the motion controls, depending on the quality of your Wiimote, even if you are playing perfectly, you still may end up having to recalibrate the controls a few times, annoyingly taking you out of the game. It seems the Joy-Cons have a way better connection fixing this problem, as well as being overall more accurate. Even the game itself was optimized to make certain actions easier with motion controls. Adding this all together, along with the way better battery life and no Fi, it is a lot more intuitive and easy to learn for those who may have had trouble before. Loftwing Amiibo. Some may hate this, and yes, it would be great if it were freely put in the game as an item to obtain, or something similar to the bonus dungeon that Tantalus added to Twilight Princess HD. Being able to quickly go back and forth between dungeons and the outside areas, or the sky and back, in an instant makes the pace of the game so much faster and more enjoyable. Instead of backtracking for 15 minutes just to visit Beetle or the Bazaar and buy potions or upgrade your shields and other items, it isn't instantly being able to warp anywhere you want, but something that may have taken 10 or 15 minutes to finish and get back to the dungeon now takes only 3 or 4 minutes. All of this, and even more changes or additions that I didn't mention, all come together to make Skyward Sword HD look, feel, and play like a completely different game. A lot more than going from Twilight Princess on the Wii with its waggle motion controls to Twilight Princess HD on the Wii U. Yes, obviously it is the same Skyward Sword game, but it plays and feels completely new, while looking many times better than even the Dolphin emulator at 4K, allowing you to see and notice many things that you just wouldn't have been able to before, and the slight improvements to the actual Link character model. It feels a lot faster and smoother. The Joy-Cons and improvements to the game make the motion controls more responsive, and easy enough for anyone to learn. You have almost no interruptions from buy or other things, like picking up rupees and items. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can honestly tell, just as Nintendo says they do, they really paid attention to all of the complaints from fans, as well as their wants and suggestions to make the game better, and they did almost everything. It is rare for a huge company like this to literally take an older game and not just remake or remaster it, but literally improve and fix every single thing that fans complained about.